Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander First Impressions, the series where I give my mostly blind reactions to Precon Commander decks for upcoming sets. My name is Grazzet, and here to help me cover the Eldrazi Incursion Precon, we have my friend, editor, co-host, and minion, Kaprak. How are you doing today, sir?
Minion is a strong word, but fine enough.
You are getting all this done so we can actually get this done, so it's appropriate. But what are we looking at today?
Well, today we have the second of four of the Modern Horizons 3 Commander decks, Eldrazi Incursion. It itself is a, 5-color colorless deck, question mark? And I just thought we'd start off with showing you the box art. I'm pretty sure you've seen it before, but, your thoughts matter.
Okay, so 5 colors plus colorless on the box. Start small, Eldrazi Smash. I don't think Eldrazi are capable of starting small. Most of their creatures are gigantic CMCs. Maybe they're referring to Spawn and Scions. 5 color is interesting because generally Eldrazi are just colorless creatures. There are some devoid creatures, I guess. Maybe they wanted to go ahead and cover those in this. But yeah, it looks like an Eldrazi tribal/typal deck, so that's what I think we're going to be seeing here today.
A lot of the Battle for Zendikar era Eldrazi are colored. I feel like that was the big issue with the previous Eldrazi deck. It was solely colorless.
What, Zuladoc?
Yes.
Well, I mean, Zuladoc's not really an Eldrazi commander. He's just a big CMC commander that happens to be an Eldrazi.
Fair, but there are just so few good, genuinely playable, mono-colorless Eldrazi, so maybe in a 5-color deck things get opened up a little.
We'll have to see. There are a lot of good Eldrazi that are devoid and can't be played in, the colorless variants of the deck. So yeah, maybe we'll see some here. Maybe you'll see some new ones. But yeah, let's get on visit.
So I'm pretty sure you've seen them before. The commander, the face card, is Ululek Fused Atrocity. For 5 colorless mana, Wooburg, or any combination of the total, you get yourself a 2/5 Eldrazi with devoid, and whenever you cast an Eldrazi spell, you may pay 2 colorless. If you do, copy all spells you control, then copy all other activated and triggered abilities you control, and you can choose new targets for the copies.
Okay, so for 5 mana, we are getting a 2/5. Below average stats for that cost. Devoid, which generally doesn't have any high impact outside of a handful of cards. All is Dust, for example, that won't blow Ululek up if we use it. But that ability is quite powerful, because at base, whenever we cast an Eldrazi spell, we just get 2 of them, because it copies the spell on the stack, so we get just 2 of our Eldrazi. However, that's not all it copies. It says copy all spells you control. So, theoretically, if we flash an Eldrazi in when another spell's already on the stack, we get to copy that too. And then, on top of that, copy all triggered abilities we control that care about us casting those Eldrazi, which makes Ululek quite powerful, in my opinion.
Yeah, when brewing over this the other day, I finally did realize, wait, the reason this copies activated and triggered abilities is specifically so it can copy cast triggers from the Eldrazi itself.
So, things that have cast triggers will still copy themselves on the stack.
Yeah, for example, we've got some Eldrazi out there, the big old Titans, they've got cast triggers like an extra turn, or, draw some cards, remove a permanent. Well, you can't copy them, but you can still get double the cast triggers.
I mean, you can copy them, you have to choose one, but yeah, that's fair. So yeah, this is a deceptive ability because you think, oh, it's just an Eldrazi tribal commander. Well, yes and no, because the spells it copies doesn't necessarily have to be Eldrazi spells. You just need an Eldrazi spell to trigger it. So I want to see if this deck has any ways to get Eldrazi cast at flash speed to take advantage of that.
There's a small handful of kindred spells as well out there that I think some of them are instants. Small spoilers, we're not really going to get into this card because it's not a high-value reprint, but I do believe Crib Swap is in the deck. Well, Crib Swap is an Eldrazi spell, and an instant.
So yes, theoretically, because it is an Eldrazi spell and you can cast it at flash speed, you can take advantage of that to trigger Ululek and then copy everything else you have on the stack. So yeah, fair. That's one way to do it. I mean, it's a good card. I think that previous Eldrazi commanders, like Zuladoc, for example, were not really Eldrazi commanders. He was specifically a big CMC commander that just Eldrazi happened to fit the bill there.
This one wants you to cast.
Yeah, this one specifically cares about Eldrazi. So, yeah, we'll have to see if Ululek here has the tools to do that in this deck.
On the flip side, you've also got the alternate commander, Ozlok, the Swelling Scourge, who's a 3-drop. A 3-drop colorless Eldrazi. It's a 2/2, okay, it's real small, and whenever it or another colorless creature you control dies, you get an experience counter. You pay Wooburg, all of your creatures get +X+X, where X is the number of experience counters you have. And then all of your spawns and scions get indestructible, and Annihilator 1 until the end of the turn.
Okay, so colorless, but not really, because of his 5-color activated ability.
Yeah.
But you are getting one of the smallest Eldrazi I've ever seen at 3 mana for a 2/2 body. And for his first ability, its first ability, it cares about colorless creatures going to our bin. So scions and spawns generally are the ones we think about when we're thinking Eldrazi. So that gives us experience counters. That's not limited to once per turn, so that means you can accumulate experience very, very quickly in comparison to other experience-focused commanders that generally accumulation is quite slow, which begs the question, is this really an Eldrazi commander versus an experience commander in disguise? Is this a 5-color experience commander?
Honestly, I don't know what it is, but it scares me.
And the activated ability is just an overrun.
There's no trample.
There's no trample, but Annihilator on a wide board of spawns and scions, that is going to do a lot of damage.
Yeah, and it's not sorcery speed, so in theory it can be used defensively too.
I mean, sure, you can protect your board with it, but you're only going to be keeping your spawns and scions.
Sometimes you just want to block a bunch of stuff and give all your stuff, +5/+5. You become impossible to attack into.
That's true. This is a good build around. I don't know if it's going to be worth keeping in the deck because that first ability suggests that you want to have ways to reliably sack away your colorless creatures, so this is going to depend on how many spawns and scions we have in the deck and ways to create them. So if there are a lot, maybe he stays in. If there aren't, maybe Azlask here gets cut and gets a build around for himself, because he seems like an interesting build around, whether he be spawn and scions or an experienced commander or some hybrid thereof.
But that's the face and alternate commanders to the deck, so let's move on to the other 13 new cards. Well, getting to the first of the new cards outside of the commanders, we're going to have Chittering Dispatcher. 2 and a green, you get a 2/3 Eldrazi drone with Devoid and Myriad, and whenever it leaves the battlefield, you create a spawn token.
Okay. 3 mana, you're getting a 2/3 Devoid and Myriad, and it has a Leaves the Battlefield trigger, which cares about it having Myriad because the creature sacrifices itself at the end of the combat phase, or if it's blocked, and you still get the spawns. Now, how long is a 2/3 going to stick around on the battlefield and reliably be able to swing in? That's what I don't like about Myriad creatures that don't have any sort of built-in evasion. They're so dependent on having to attack in to get value out of them, so not too hot on this one.
It's 3 mana, and it generates you 3 mana guaranteed. It's a delayed ritual.
Yeah, but what's the difference between running this and like Thran Dynamo, which is going to be reliably able to generate you 3 colorless mana forever, versus this, which is going to be able to do it once?
This might get you 6.
Well, but realistically, it'll get you 3, and then everything is going to be blocked.
Legitimately, I think I can see this as a place for the kind of card that is going to take you from 3 mana to 9 or 12 mana relatively comfortably.
That's a bit ambitious, I think.
It's a 4-player game. Someone's going to be open.
Maybe. I will concede that in certain boards where if somebody's not running a bunch of creatures, you can reliably swing in, but you can't reliably get that in every single table, and this is going to be more of a liability than an actual asset in comparison to other forms of more reliable ramp, which is what I want in a deck. I want my ramp to be reliable, because if it fails, especially in an Eldrazi deck, which is going to have really high CMC creatures, that's the one part where I don't want my ramp to be unreliable.
If you're on turn 4 and everyone's got a 3x at the table, you're in a very interesting table. That's all I gotta say. It takes you from 3 to 7 if you hit your land drop, and on the next turn, it's probably going to take you to 10, and that's pretty much where you want to be with Eldrazi, roughly 9 to 12. I feel like this is going to so frequently enable a turn 5, well, I can't deal with that. I just lose. Level threat.
I can see your argument. I can see the fact that if this goes unanswered, it can potentially generate you insane amounts of mana. I'm just thinking worst case scenario that this has no good attacks, and then you're left with a 2/3 Eldrazi that doesn't do anything because it's just going to die. Or it's going to give you 3 colorless mana, I suppose, is the maximum it's going to be able to do, which isn't bad.
3 mana for 3 mana? Even if it's temporary? Again, it's just a ritual. And we're in Eldrazi, so sometimes you just want a ritual.
It's a ritual that takes a full rotation to get online.
Fair enough. Moving on to another 3-drop in Eldrazi, which is a weird sentence to say out loud. It Mutated Cultist. 2 and a black. Get you a 1/3 Eldrazi horror with Devoid, again, and Death Touch. And a cast trigger, which, on cast, you remove all counters from up to 1 target permanent or opponent, and the next spell you cast this turn costs 1 less to cast for each counter removed this way. It's another ritual, but like literally a ritual for this turn.
Well, I mean, it's a ritual that has a lot of conditions attached. At base, this is a 3 mana 1/3 with Death Touch. It'll only really shine if your opponent has Planeswalkers, because you're going to be able to just instantly destroy any one of their Planeswalkers by reducing their loyalty to 0, and give yourself a big discount on the next spell you cast. And also a silver bullet if you're playing in a pod that happens to have the energy deck from this set.
Or, somebody running the experience version of this deck.
True, because experience also goes on the person, or you're feeling benevolent and you want to blow out somebody's poison counters to get a significant discount if you need to keep them alive against the infect player.
And I'll argue that if this is just hitting you 3 or 4 +1/+1 counters, it's still not bad. Especially if you can chain it into something else on the same turn, because a lot of things here do cost colorless mana.
But again, like the previous card, the problem I have with it, it's unreliable. If nobody's running energy, because let's face it, energy isn't exactly the most common archetype here, even though it got a lot of support. If nobody's running infect, if nobody's running experience, because that's even rarer than energy, and if nobody's running super friends to reliably get lots of planeswalkers out, because generally people are running 1 or 2 planeswalkers, if that, in their decks, this guy's just a 3 mana 1/3 Death Touch creature.
I think in every given pod, it's still going to have a target, or, a player with targets.
Again, I'm always about that reliability. If you say that I can't play this card on most boards and it do something apart from being a overcosted Death Toucher, I'm not going to be in love with this card. And that's where I find that Mutated Cultist here is lacking, that there's too many variables. There's too many instances where I draw into this and say, well, I could have had a 3 mana rock and it would have been better than this.
You know what? Fair enough. Let's move on to another cheap black Eldrazi. We've got Bismuth Mindrender. 3 and a black. 4/3, Eldrazi, Devoid, and Menace this time. Whenever it deals combat damage to a player, they exile cards on top of their library until you hit a non-land, and you can cast that card by paying life equal to the mana value rather than mana cost that turn.
So 4 mana for a 4/3 pseudo-evasive creature that needs to reliably get in for a powerful effect, granted. Being able to steal a spell from an opponent and then cast it for quote-unquote free is powerful.
And it always hits a spell.
Right, it can't whiff. The problem I have is Menace does not reliably get it in for damage. On a 4/3 body, if it had higher stats, if it had better evasion, but again, this is 3 for 3 of these cards in this deck that I'm not liking. Flying, can't be blocked, give me something. Menace isn't good enough for an attack that absolutely has to get in to be worth anything.
These are cheap Eldrazi. There's only so much budget that these things can have for power, and you need some Eldrazi that cost less than 6 to actually pad out the deck and work. Remember, you can get 2 of these.
That's fair, but I don't know. I'm not a fan. I can see your argument here that, we have to pad it with smaller Eldrazi. Zuladoc didn't have this problem. He's just in colorless. They didn't have baby Eldrazi that he had to babysit and that had mediocre effects.
That was people's problem. There just weren't enough Eldrazi, because they didn't fill it out with low mana value Eldrazi. They just put in a handful of the big beaters that are actually good, and didn't use the handful of not good colorless Eldrazi that exist that are a little lower down the curve. These are absolutely fine cards that fill out a dead space in the deck. Because you can't just have a deck that goes 2 2-drops, 4 3-drops, 17 4-drops, 10 5-drops. You can't just have a mana cliff.
If my low CMC Eldrazi are these things, maybe that mana cliff is looking better because, like I said, I don't think these particular ones are all-star brood members here. But yeah, that's just my 2 cents. I can see this being a good card because if you're able to get in reliably for damage, that effect is really powerful. It's the getting in reliably for damage part that I'm concerned about.
Agree to disagree. We've got another 4 mana Eldrazi here.
Well, let's see if this one doesn't disappoint me.
Well, it's Inversion Behemoth. 2 and 2 colorless. Get you a 2/9. Again, it's an Eldrazi. And at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can switch the power and toughness of each of any number of target creatures till the end of turn.
Well, that's an interesting little effect.
It is.
4 mana gives you a 2/9, which is huge defensive body. And then being able to just mess with any number of targets. So you don't even have to choose the entire board or anything. You just pick and choose whatever you want to switch the power and toughness of.
Yeah. The obvious thing is that this is a 9/2.
It's a vanilla 9/2.
The scary thing is that this just straight up kills OXs.
I mean, so wall decks, beware, I suppose.
Sometimes people just got something with 0 power, and you're just like, that's dead now.
I mean, how often do you encounter wall tribal? But, I mean, this one's more interesting than the previous ones that we saw because it's not really dependent on it doing anything else other than existing in order to be effective. But I can't say that this is a spectacular ability. It's only a combat on your turn. Sure, you can make sure that your big Eldrazi are going to be able to get in by turning things that aren't just mirrored power and toughness by making them weaker or stronger depending on what you want your Eldrazi to be able to do, either get through them or bring them down. But yeah, I really can't say that this is wowing me or really forwarding the game plan of the deck other than it being an Eldrazi, because getting 2 of these off of our commander doesn't really do anything other than get us another 2/9 on board.
It's a defensive body in a deck that's going to be a little slower, and it really screws with combat math. Some people are going to be dependent on having their own, their 2/9s and the like, and now their blocks, they're going to be able to kill your stuff, but they're going to get blown out. And some people are dependent on having their aggressive, hard-hitting creatures that aren't necessarily the most defensive. And now they have all these defensive creatures when you're attacking, so you just get to make some free attacks, maybe kill a thing.
You're working on the assumption that people have odd stat blocks, because most creatures are just going to be 3/3s, 4/4s, 5/5s, 6/6s, and even if they have some disparity, it's going to be maybe a 4/5. Turning a 4/5 into a 5/4 is sometimes going to be relevant, but largely is going to be more of a just, okay, I've done that, doesn't really change anything.
Well enough. Move on. We're going to hit our first 6-drop of the deck, a 6-drop creature, Angelic Aberration. 5 and a white, 4/4 Eldrazi Angel, with Devoid, Flying, and Vigilance, and when enters the battlefield, sacrifice any number of creatures with a base power or toughness of 1 or less, which then allows you to turn them into that many colorless Eldrazi Angel creature tokens with Flying and Vigilance.
Okay, so this is more along the lines of what we're looking for here. Big Eldrazi, 6 mana, 4/4, Flying Vigilance. You are getting an interesting ETB effect in which you're going to be able to turn all your Scions and Spawns into 4/4s, evasive 4/4s with Vigilance on top of that. Yeah, okay. I think this is here more for the alternate commander than the face, but this is still usable?
Honestly, I think this card just ends up in decks that aren't Eldrazi. I think this just ends up going in some Selesnya Go-Wide tokens or Hyper Ramp decks, and just, I'm going to convert all my 1/1 elves into 4/4 Flying Vigilant Angels.
I mean, that makes sense. This card's not bad. I think it goes more in the token / Scion Spawn direction more than the base. But
it's still just a big body that's kind of defensive.
I mean, big is relative.
Big enough.
It's a 4/4 Flying Vigilance body in a world where we have 8/8s, 9/9s, 13/13s in the same tribe. But yeah, this one's fine.
It's really straightforward. A lot of them have been.
This isn't crazy, and I don't think the face commander can make the best use of it, because getting a second one, you're still going to sacrifice the same amount of creatures. You're just getting an extra 4/4 Flying Vigilance body, which maybe is enough, but
you're not going to complain about it, but you're not playing the commander to do this twice.
No, you want to copy bigger bodies with Annihilator or bigger effects, things like that. This, not the best target to get 2 of. You're not going to complain, but you are going to be disappointed.
Would you like one of those?
Yes, I would. I would like not to be disappointed today.
Well, I don't think you're going to be disappointed by this next card. Benthic Anomaly. 6 and a blue to a 7/8 Eldrazi Serpent with, again, Devoid. I'm going to read this one slowly. When you cast this spell, for each opponent, choose a creature that player controls. Create a token that is a copy of one of those creatures, except its power is equal to the total power of all of the creatures. Its toughness is equal to the total toughness of all of the creatures, and it is a colorless Eldrazi. Long story short, cast trigger, not an enter the battlefield trigger.
Yeah, which does get copied by our commander.
You pick one creature from each opponent.
Mm-hmm.
One of those you get a token copy of.
Right.
But its power is the power of all 3 combined, and its toughness is the toughness of all 3 combined, and it is a colorless Eldrazi.
Okay, so you're going to be picking the best effect, or best keywords, or best whatever, everything other than stats creature on the board, and then picking the biggest creature. The other 2 are going to be the biggest creatures.
Yeah, it can be whatever you need. The best effects, just the biggest, just cram the 3 biggest together. This just creates some weird monstrosity. It's the 3 largest things that you can find, or the 3 coolest things, and just make a big toy.
Yeah, that is a big flashy effect, and yeah, you get a gigantic beat stick that has the best effect on the table that's not yours.
And that's the thing, even if you're casting this on 7 without your commander, it's a cast trigger, so if somebody counters it, you still get the big dumb token.
That's fair. I mean, this builds up your board state. It's 2 bodies for the price of 1, and the abomination that you're creating is going to be the most dangerous effect on the table that's on a creature that happens to have the biggest stats of probably anything on the table, including your things. So, yeah, this one's pretty powerful. Yeah, I really can't complain about that, and so far, this one's one of the best ones we've seen so far.
So do you want another one of those?
Yes, please. Give me more gigantic beat sticks with crazy effects.
Cool. This one is Hideous Taskmaster. Again, 6 in a red, 7/2, Eldrazi with Devoid. A Hideous Taskmaster also has Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1. And when you cast this, again, this is a cast trigger, for each opponent, gain control up to 1 target creature they control, untap, those creatures gain Trample, Haste, and Annihilator 1 till end of turn.
Well, firstly, that's rude. Calling it hideous, I mean, we don't know Eldrazi beauty standards enough to call this thing hideous. That's just rude. You're gonna ruin this thing's self-confidence. But as far as the rest of it's concerned, 7 mana for a 7/2 is a glass cannon. Trample, Haste, Annihilator 1 makes it even more of a glass cannon. But the effect to be able to temporarily steal an opponent's creature, granted all its keywords, and that can swing in that turn, is pretty decent.
And then you do that to all of your opponents.
Right.
And then you do it twice.
Right. You're going to be able to get this thing in probably safely by just removing someone's blockers. Because, yeah, it's each opponent.
I'm not saying this ends the game, because remember, you're going to end up with 8 Annihilator triggers.
Right. This plus 3 more, assuming, of course, that each opponent has at least 2 creatures to steal, of course.
If you just cast this once, that's 4 Annihilator triggers. If you copy it, you get 8. So that's going to make it even harder for this to be blocked super effectively, unless people are willing to set themselves back in the mid to late game and throw out lands.
Yep, turns out there's no restriction on where you have to point the creatures you steal, so this can all go to one very unfortunate opponent who's going to be eating 8 Annihilator triggers and be left with the option of either getting rid of all their blockers to be able to survive the turn, or getting rid of all their lands to be able to block and then not being able to play the game.
Or conceding.
Yes, if I were to get hit with 8 Annihilator triggers, I would probably just scoop. Good game, game 2.
I'm going to remember that for future reference.
Please don't.
Oh, we've got a few more big, giant Eldrazi. This one's just 7 mana. Just 7, any color, Spawnbed Protector. Normal Eldrazi, 6/8. At the beginning of your end step, return up to 1 target Eldrazi creature card from your graveyard to your hand. Make 2 Scions.
Okay, so 7 mana, you're getting a 6/8, which is pretty average for an Eldrazi.
You're really getting an 8/10.
Fair, because you're getting the 2 extra bodies on your end phase, so that is going to make it effectively an 8/10 across 3 bodies. And you do get to get an Eldrazi back on your end step too, so it is constantly recurring your Eldrazi's from the bin, but the spawning is not contingent on you doing that, so you're going to get the spawn regardless. Yeah, it's fine, it's good. No crazy effects here. This is just a tribal value piece for getting your tribe members back and getting a bit of ramp and just doing Eldrazi things. So
yeah, I'm not going to straight out call it an Eldrazi staple going forward, but it's going to be as close as you can get to a staple without being a staple. But yeah, no, it's a solid card that's probably going to see a lot of play in a very niche deck, but the niche deck will be happy with it.
Yeah, fair. I mean, even in this deck, you copy this, you're getting 2 Eldrazi back a turn, which if it's in the mid to late game, there's been a board wipe or 2 or just removal has come your way and you've taken some casualties, this will get you your Eldrazi back. This will ramp you so you can recast those Eldrazi, and if you're playing the alternate commander, you're getting more Scions into play to be able to make use of the overrun effect that it has. So yeah, this can see play in both decks, and the effect may not be flashy, but it is efficient.
Well, speaking of more giant colorless Eldrazi, up next we have Twins of Discord. Get yourself a 7 mana 8/6 Eldrazi, and when you attack, you choose either odd or even, and creatures with a mana value of that quality cannot block this turn. And then each other colorless creature you control has Bloodthirst too.
So for those players who weren't playing Magic the Gathering 10 years ago, Bloodthirst 2 means that if an opponent was dealt damage, that creature comes in with 2+1/+1 counters whenever you cast that creature.
It's if an opponent has taken damage, when that creature enters the battlefield, it gets that many +1/+1 counters.
So our colorless Eldrazi are going to be even bigger, which they're going to have gigantic stat blocks that are made even larger.
I do believe this does apply to tokens as well.
Yeah, it does. Why wouldn't it? Is Bloodthirst a cast trigger or enter the battlefield?
It's enter the battlefield.
Yeah, so yeah, it does apply to tokens.
So this means your Scions and Spawns are also going to be a little larger.
They're going to be 2/3s or 3/3s respectively, which is not bad. And then, conservatively, grants evasion to your board.
Well, it's not really evasion. It just makes blocking math a nightmare.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's not too bad. Being able to reliably get your Eldrazi in, since for all their Annihilator, for all their gigantic stats, a lot of Eldrazi don't have built-in trample or evasion to be able to reliably get in for damage. So this kind of fixes that to some extent.
And on the sake of copying this thing, I believe having 2 of these would mean you get 2 triggers, yes?
Yes, you would, because each one of them would see you attack, you choose odd on one, you choose even on the other, and then your board is just unblockable.
And I think Bloodthirst stacks as well, which would functionally be Bloodthirst 4. Though, having a board of unblockable Eldrazi kind of makes that irrelevant.
Yeah, that's terrifying.
Well, we have one more very, very large Eldrazi. For 10 mana, you can get Ulamog's Dreadsire, which is a 10/10 with Vigilance. And Ward, sacrifice a permanent with mana value 1 or greater, that also can tap to create more 10/10 colorless Eldrazi creature tokens.
Okay, so this is a Desolation Twin, but a lot slower. It's got a built-in keyword in Vigilance, so that's nice. The Ward, I'm not a big fan of these sacrifice wards because if your opponent wants to get rid of it, they're going to get rid of it. They're going to sacrifice one of their creatures to path it.
Guarantees a 2-for-1.
Yeah, they're going to end up 2-for-1ing themselves if they want to get rid of this, but if they want to get rid of it, they can. But the ability to tap this to create another 10/10 seems good on paper, but is really slow.
It's a slow deck? Question mark? It's Eldrazi. I expect it to be slow. If the Eldrazi deck is fast, then what are you supposed to do?
That's fair. I mean, at the end of the day, you're getting gigantic 10/10s. This gets better if you have some way to grant this thing haste, but realistically, you're going to be playing this, swinging in with it when it can attack, whether it be haste enabled or not, and then creating the 10/10 on your opponent's turn since you can do it at instant speed. So, yeah, that's fine. I'm not being wowed by this because at least Desolation Twin comes in with a buddy immediately, so you still get 20 worth of stats without having to worry about surviving a full rotation to get any value. This potentially can create a lot more bodies, but is a lot slower. So you just have to decide whether the trade-off is worth it.
We are a 5-color deck. Token duplication is a thing. This can really get out of hand if you really go into, like, I want to go super wide with Spawn and Scions and just have this as more incidental token creation because I'm already populating or have my doubling seasons or whatever.
Yeah, if you can populate token it creates, then you're just going to go crazy with going wide with 10/10s, and that's going to be enough to win games.
Going wide with 10/10s is a scary sentence.
Yes, but this one's fine. I'm not sure if it's better than Desolation Twin just because Desolation Twin's a little bit faster, but it depends on what you want out of your deck, I suppose.
Well, we have 3 non-creature spells from this deck that are new. The first of which is going to be Eldritch Immunity, which is a single colorless mana. And this gets you a Kindred instant Eldrazi. So this is an Eldrazi spell and can be copied, and also, triggers your commander at instant speed with other things on the stack. It gives target creature you control protection from each color until end of turn, and for 4 and a colorless, you can overload it to do it to all creatures you control.
Well, this is no heroic intervention, but it's close. Protection's not as good as Indestructible or Hexproof, but on the flip side, it does grant evasion and protection from each color for 5 mana to give your entire Eldrazi creature base. The ability to just bypass everything but colorless blockers means you can use this defensively to keep them alive, or as a way to alpha strike your opponents and close out the game, which is the flexibility I like in spells like this.
Sometimes your commander needs to live, sometimes you need to just win the game.
Yeah, and this does both. I like the flexibility. Overall, it's a good card in my opinion, and it's going to see a decent amount of play, I think.
I don't expect to see it have too much play outside of dedicated decks for colorless, but it's going to be there.
Yeah, I agree.
So our second of 3 non-creature spells is, Eldrazi Confluence, because of course, they had to make a Confluence for Eldrazi. This one's 2 and 2 colorless, gets you a normal instant, so this one does not trigger your commander. And choose 3. You may choose the same mode more than once. First one, target creature gets +3/-3 till end of turn. Second one, exile target non-land permanent, then return it to the battlefield tapped on owner's control. Third one, create a Scion.
So for 4 mana, you're blowing 3 X3s up, or an X6 and an X3, or an X9, or bouncing 3 blockers, presumably, so your Eldrazi can get in, or creating 3 1/1s, which is the least impressive one.
Remember, those 1/1s are ramp, and this can save your creatures from removal as well.
That's fair. Like all the other confluences, it is a very flexible spell, and it is going to allow us to do lots of things, those things being mostly removal, some ramp. It's not the flashiest spell in the world, but it does offer a lot of flexibility, which is why I personally like it. I like the options it gives you.
Like, sometimes this is going to be a 3-for-1.
Yeah, which you're not going to complain about.
Sometimes this is going to kill somebody, And sometimes
Yeah.
you just hold this up on the end of turn 4 and just make 3 Scions and then play an 8-drop on turn 5.
And the ability to do that all on one spell is what sells it for me.
Like, again, anything that gets crazy fast ramp in this deck is scary because sudden giant Eldrazi are not something you want to mess with.
I mean, it turns out getting gigantic beat sticks on board faster than your opponents will win games.
Well, we have one more card, brand new for this set, and it's a sorcery now. This will be Selective Obliteration. 3 and 2 colorless. Each player chooses a color. Then you exile each permanent, unless it's colorless, or it's only the color its controller chose.
Okay, that is a board wipe. That is a pick your favorite child board wipe.
This board wipe does nothing against monocolored decks.
No, but it hoses everybody else, particularly commanders that are in multiple colors, because
Yes.
that says only the color of its controller's choosing. So multicolored cards, you cannot save. Anything that's more than one color is going to go away. Colorless stays, everything that's monocolored of the opponent's choice stays, and then, everything else goes away, and it's exiled, so it gets around most destruction protection. Yeah, this is a good card.
I don't think it hits any of the creatures in the deck. Mind you, that says permanents.
That's his permanence, yeah.
So,
This is all this dust territory of just sending people back to the Stone Age.
yeah. Like, for context, I think the majority of the creatures in this deck are either devoid or just pure colorless. There might be a few non-creature hits in the deck, but this, for the most part, doesn't touch anything you have.
All right, yeah, it's a good board wipe. I really can't complain about this. If it's a one-sided board wipe that also blows up non-creatures and leaves your entire board mostly untouched, yeah, you can't really complain about that for 5 mana.
It is functionally always dust too, but it's 5 mana because it misses sometimes. Like, sometimes you're in a pod and you sit down across from someone playing a Krenko deck and someone playing a Talran deck and someone playing like some, Ashling, like 60 mountain deck, and you just go, well, that's a dead card.
Well, yeah, but I mean, generally, you're at least going to hit one opponent with this because most players aren't going to pigeonhole themselves into playing a single color when they have so many good multicolored options. But yeah, overall, you really can't complain about this one. This is a powerful board wipe that's going to keep your board state intact, level your opponent's boards, back row and front row. So yeah, you'll run it. If you're running all this dust, there's no reason not to run this.
So with that being all the new cards, we still have some cards that are new, but they're technically reprints because they're in the main Modern Horizons set. Now, just for reference, you've seen very little of the main set, like, formally, right?
Right. I know there's been a bunch of spoilers, but I haven't been digging through intentionally.
A handful of the big mythics, some of the, like, splashy rares and legendaries, but I think these are all commons and uncommons that you haven't seen before.
Yeah, let's see what we got.
For the sake of these sort of semi-new cards, and ones that are at least new to you, we'll start with Wastscape Battle Mage. 1 colorless gets you a 2/2 Eldrazi Wizard, but it has Kicker for either a green or 1 and a blue. If you pay the green kicker, exile target artifact or enchantment an opponent controls. If you pay the blue kicker, return target creature an opponent controls to its owner's hand. It is a classic battle mage done Eldrazi.
Yeah, for 2 mana, you get a 2/2 body, so a bear. And then if you upcast it with its kicker, you get to turn it into a body that brings removal. Theoretically, you can 2-for-1 an opponent with this by blowing up a piece of back row and bouncing something else. It's fine.
Just an incredibly flexible little guy. It's an Eldrazi when Eldrazi decks, don't have little guys.
Yeah, I mean, it's not so little when you're going to get the maximum value out of it, then you're paying 5 mana for this.
Yeah, sometimes you just pay it on 3 because you want to blow up somebody's Soul Ring.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, it's fine. I'm not sure if it's going to stay in the deck or not, because there is generally better removal than this, because if you're casting this for 3, I mean, you're in colors already, may as well run Generous Gift, Beast Within. They already hit any permanents that aren't limited to just 1.
I genuinely don't know the answer to this question, and if you don't, no worries. If you copy a kicked spell, you get the kicker effect, yes?
I have no idea.
Just a thought, works in this deck, turn into 2 pieces of removal.
Yeah, true. But then you have to pay even more mana.
If it works.
You still have to pay the 5 just to have it pop the back row twice. Or 7 if you wanted to do double back row, double bounce.
Fair enough. The second quote-unquote new card is Glaring Fleshraker. 2 and a colorless, get you a 2/2 Eldrazi Drone. And this says, whenever you cast a colorless spell, you create an Eldrazi spawn. And whenever another colorless creature enters the battlefield under your control, this deals 1 damage to each opponent. A nice little Eldrazi glue guy.
Yeah, he's going to be spawning spawns, and then when those spawns die, turning it into AoE burn. Yeah, he's pretty good.
No, that's not die, that's ETB.
ETB. Okay, so yeah, fair. So whenever he creates them and anything else creates spawns, or any other creature just enters the battlefield, just happens to be colorless, turns it into a AoE burn. So yeah, I really can't complain about that. I think he's here more for the alternate commander than our primary one, but he still works. Most of our deck's colorless.
This is a scary amount of ramp. Like, there's a world where you sandbag your mana rocks until you have this in play, just so you can go on 3, play this, and then 4, just go like mana rock, mana rock, mana rock. And on 5, just, again, drop something dumb that if they don't respond to, they lose.
Yeah, that's true. The downside with this type of thing, it's ramp that's contingent on you having other spells to cast. So if you have a high curve, those other spells may be too expensive for you to cast if you're needing to reliably cast those spells to get the ramp that you generate off this.
That's fair.
But it can generate you substantial amount of ramp in the situation that you described.
It's a fun little guy, and it helps a deck that's going to be notoriously slow. Speaking of things like that, we have Snapping Voidcraw. This is an Eldrazi Turtle. 1 in a Simic. For a 1/3, Eldrazi Turtle, devoid, taps for 2 colorless, or 3 in a colorless, tap it, draw a card.
Okay, so this is effectively a Worn Power Stone that happens to be an Eldrazi that you can later use to draw cards?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure.
Like, between this and the energy deck, we're definitely going to have to look back at the main set and go, okay, so what can come forward? Because energy and Eldrazi are definitely major sub-themes of Modern Horizons 3, and can probably give some things to this deck outside of the rest of all of Magic.
I mean, generally I wouldn't look at it this twice, because I don't like dorks on the premise that they can easily just die incidentally to board wipes or just get a remove by spot removal. This, however, plays into our primary commander because you can get 2 of them.
Also, this is not, I'm going to be frank, this is not a land-based ramp deck. Because of the needs of the mana in the deck, there's just not a lot of space, unless you're really willing to spend big on all the non-basic ramp.
It depends on how the mana base looks like.
It looks like something, I can promise you that.
Because, we're in green. There'd be very little reason why not to run your Rampant Growths, Cultivates, Kodama's Reaches, 3 Visits. They're going to fix you.
I can think of some reasons.
All right, fair. But yeah, this one's fine. You can copy it with your commander. It is effectively a Worn Power Stone because you can't use it until the following turn, with the upside being that you can turn it into card draw later, with the downside that this dies to other stuff.
It also blocks. Like, does your Worn Power Stone block?
No, generally not.
And our last of the, quote, new cards, Titan's Vanguard. 5 mana, 5/5 Eldrazi. That's 3 in Gruul. It's got Trample. It's got Devoid. Whenever you cast this spell, it's a cast trigger, and whenever it attacks, it's an attack trigger, you put a +1/+1 counter on each colorless creature you control.
So kind of a lord.
Lord adjacent, that also keeps lording harder.
It has to swing in, so no, it does it
No,
when
it
you
doesn't.
cast
You just
this.
have to cast it.
So if
Which means it can be copied.
yes, with our commander, if we have the 2 spare, we pay 7 to cast this. You get to get 2 +1/+1 counters onto your entire board. Not the Titans themselves, because they'd still be on the stack, but they can then make each other bigger. So they do make themselves bigger on subsequent attacks. Yeah, that's not bad.
Like, we're already Eldrazi. We're already kind of getting out of hand with big dumb things. It's just funny that this allows you to take your medium dumb things and make them into big dumb things.
Yeah, that's fair. Making your smaller dudes, if we opt to keep them bigger, or again, if we're heavy on spawns and scions, making them into actual threats outside of just the ramp they provide, is always decent. And being a Eldrazi with trample is nice, because we don't see a lot of that too often.
Yeah, reach from an Eldrazi, but, like, not actual reach.
Right. Damage reach. Capability of ending the game reach. Nice to have.
Yeah. Well, speaking of other actual reprints, cards that have seen printings before this set, again, I've sort of grouped these into rough value ranges. Prices have gone down since I've looked, so I've tried to look back a few days to make sure that I'm looking at prices kind of accurate before these were spoiled. And my honorable mention for this, because it's funny, and it was like $1, Imprisoned in the Moon. Wizards, why would you do this?
It's Imprisoned in the Moon. You gotta remember that Emrakul is stuck in the moon on Innistrad.
But it's the Eldrazi deck. Why would they want to be reminded of that?
Now, to be fair, this is a good piece of removal.
Yeah.
Generally, turning somebody's creature, land, or planeswalker into functionally a waste.
Or bricking their commander because you're a monster.
Yes, this always hits people's commanders because it is infuriating to circumvent. You have to have some way to either sacrifice the permanent in question or get rid of the enchantment, a lot of which is difficult to do depending on who you're asking.
Like, again, it makes it a land, so bouncing it is a lot harder. Sacrificing it is a lot harder. So you have to find a way to deal with the enchantment, and if you can just bounce the enchantment, well, you're just going to do it again.
And there's some colors that can't deal with it. Mono Black's option is Feed the Swarm.
There's a second one that I can't remember.
Their realistic option is Feed the Swarm. And then your other decks, Mono White is going to have to Generous Gift, which they don't want to do.
Well, Mono White has a ton of enchantment removal, too.
Yeah, but are they running it?
Fair.
Their suites of removal look like Path, Swords, Generous Gift, Stroke of Midnight, things like that.
Maybe that's a lesson that you should broaden your enchantment removal.
No, I'm still right. You will not feel good about getting rid of it, but at least you have the option to do so.
Take a note down to put disenchant in more decks.
Woof, no. But yes, this is a very good piece of removal.
Now, we've got a bunch of what are currently very low price cards because they weren't super high, but they're going down fast. Roughly $2-ish in that general $2-3 range before the reprinting. And I feel like this is one that definitely would have gone up had it not been reprinted. We've got Awakening Zone.
To make spawns.
Just churning them out.
I mean, it's not the greatest card. You're getting a 0/1 just on your upkeep for mana purposes. It's there for the alternate commander.
It's there for the alternate commander. This probably would have been a couple bucks had it not been printed. It's a nice to have. I expect you to cut it, but it's always been a special card for me just because it's just a fun cube card.
It's not a bad card. I mean, generally I like to see it in more Aristocrats themes decks like Rogari Aristocrats because you have a creature you can sacrifice for ramp that doesn't require a sack outlet.
Creatures that can sacrifice themselves are cool.
This is fine, but not groundbreaking for this deck, I don't think.
While we're talking about Spawn, we've got another one of those that was like $250 and probably would have been more had it not been here. Skittering Invasion.
I'm always on the fence about this one. You're paying 7 for 0/5 worth of stats.
But 5 mana, and you can copy this.
Yeah, it's a tribal sorcery, so theoretically, you're paying 9 mana to get 10 mana back. That still doesn't sound good to me.
Yeah, but then you have all the little synergies that we've seen so far in this deck, and it just starts to feel like...
This goes in the alternate commander, too.
It does go in the alternate commander, though, again, it was fun with Glaring Fleshraker.
Okay, sure.
Just suddenly everyone takes 12.
Yeah, but you have to have both of them on the field at the same time, and your commander. We're jumping through a lot of hoops to make a mediocre card serviceable.
A good card playable.
You are entitled to your opinion, no matter how wrong it happens to be.
Well, here's a card that I've seen you use a lot that you're going to be happy isn't going to be more expensive, because again, this thing probably would have rocketed up had it not been here. Ugin the Ineffable.
Eugene? Gotta love Eugene. We're in a colorless deck. He reduces the cost of all colorless spells. Brilliant. Kind of sort of draws you cards. Brilliant.
I think this hits like 95% of the spells in your deck.
Yeah.
I think you saw the majority of the non-colorless spells just now in Awakening Zone and Prison in the Moon.
Yeah, there's no reason why this shouldn't be here. If it wasn't in here, it would be added. He reduces the cost of colorless spells, which we have lots of, gives us card advantage, which we need, and provides a repeatable permanent destruction, which is fantastic. So, yeah, no reason not to run him. Fantastic addition, 5 out of 5, no notes.
Good to see the price kept down.
Yeah, he keeps creeping back up. He's never been the most expensive version of Ugin, not by a long shot.
And he never will be.
No, no, he will not. But he's very good for colorless decks.
Another thing on the low end of the spectrum, but it's a really good card. Like, honestly, probably one of the most underrated Eldrazi Displacer.
Yeah, Displacer's fine.
It gets you so much. Like, this thing shuts down removal. This thing makes blocking a nightmare. This thing doubles up ETB triggers. It's mana intensive, but this is a mana intensive deck.
That's fair. Just because there is a lot of flexibility with being able to flicker your or your opponent's creatures.
And again, it returns tapped. That's the big thing.
Right. So you're getting blockers out of the way. You're protecting your own creatures from targeted removal.
It doesn't stop Wraths, but it does so much. And again, it's an old school cube all-star, and I think it probably deserves more respect than a lot of white decks nowadays. And now it's going to be cheaper.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't play with this one too often in my decks, mainly because that colorless pip is hard to come by in colored decks at times. But yeah, maybe here. Then again, our commander doesn't really care about the creatures entering the battlefield. It cares about cast.
It does. It cares about both. Because if you're getting enter the battlefield effects, well, you're still doubling the number of creatures. So you get a copy of the creature, so now you just get 2 enter the battlefield effects.
But you still need to cast an Eldrazi spell in order to trigger it.
Yeah, but my point is, like, your commander doubles both cast triggers and ETB triggers because you're just doubling the creatures, which is 2 ETB triggers.
It's an interesting card.
Yeah, no, I like Eldrazi Displacer. Not an expensive little guy, but a fun little guy.
Hmm.
We've got another one of the non-colorless spells in this deck. We've got Rishkar's Expertise.
We're running big things, turning big things into card advantage, and getting a free 5-drop spell. It's not bad.
Yeah, no, there's nothing to complain about here. It's expensive, but everything's expensive. That's kind of the point.
Yeah. You're going to be able to reload your hand with this so long as you have any Eldrazi that's not our commander, generally. And, getting a 5-drop, which is generally going to be a rock or something of that nature.
There's some nice mid-range Eldrazi in this deck.
Yeah, but we're assuming they're staying in the deck.
Fair. And because this is, again, a 5-color deck, very color-intensive, a lot of stuff going on, sometimes it's just going to let you cast something for free that you can't cast otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, the downside here is it does take 2 green pips.
I think it is green forward, but not super heavily. So, into the slightly bigger hitters, we've mentioned it before, it had to be here, couldn't be anywhere else, All is Dust.
Yeah. All is Dust is a colorless all-star. You resolve this and generally you win the game.
Again, I think this hits all but 3 of the permanents in the deck, and those are all enchantments.
Yeah. This resolves, you win the game.
Like, you are safe from this, everyone else is dead, you just Alpha Strike after.
Yeah.
This is a counter this spell or lose the game.
Generally, yeah. You're sending your opponents back to the Stone Age.
Well, next we have one of those typal cards that's probably never going to be... This card's never going to be budget, but it's going to be cheap enough for you to play occasionally. Herald's Horn.
Herald's Horn. You get a -1 discount on Eldrazi, and at the beginning of your upkeep, look at the top card. If it's an Eldrazi, reveal it, put it into your hand, so it's draw.
Eldrazi creature.
Yeah, okay, Eldrazi creature, sure, so we're not getting the kindred spells off of this.
This is a 29 creature deck, and I believe they are all Eldrazi.
Roughly a third of our deck? Yeah, it's fine, sure. This is going to see play in most typal decks, so you were fine. You're going to keep it in the deck because we're a typal deck.
And up next we have, I think this is the most expensive individual Eldrazi in the deck. Okay, it's not, but technically it's not. Sire of Stagnation.
Sire of Stagnation, I haven't seen this card in forever. But yes, it is a good card. 6 mana for a 5/7 that whenever an opponent's land enters the battlefield under your control, they exile a top 2 and you get to draw 2. So, best case scenario, you're drawing 6 cards per rotation with this. More against green decks that have their Cultivates, their Kodama's Reaches, stuff like that, if they're playing them into late game.
I just want to flash this out in response to somebody casting Explosive Vegetation.
Explosive Veg in 2024?
Yeah, I know there's better versions, but we're also somebody playing Sire of Stagnation, so...
Yeah, well... Sire Stagnation doesn't see play because generally there are better options.
It was like a $5 card that doesn't really make sense in a lot of builds. If it's cheap, if this really drives the price down, I think Sire Stagnation might just deserve to see a little play in moderate-sized, blue-black decks that just want to make your opponent hate themselves.
Well, Dimir Reanimator, cheat this out, get a lot of value off of it. Crucially, again, good with the face commander of the deck because getting 2 of these means 12 cards per rotation?
Getting 2 of these means...
You're in the danger of decking yourself out.
Yes. Getting 2 of these means, does this deck come with Reliquary Tower in it? Spoilers, yes it does.
Well, I mean, it makes sense we're in colorless. But yeah, it's fine. Not one I expected, but I suppose it makes sense. It's an Eldrazi, it's big, it's good to get extra copies of it, and it generates card advantage.
This is probably the only deck where it can be reprinted and make sense.
Yeah.
One more, decent hit that, again, if it weren't here, it'd be really expensive. Forsaken Monument.
Yeah, I was about to mention. But yeah, we're in colorless. This ticks all the boxes, makes your colorless creatures bigger, so good for Eldrazi, good for Scions and Spawn.
That first line doesn't matter, that last line doesn't matter, that middle line...
Okay, they do. The +2/+2 for basically your entire deck is relevant. The fact that you are padding your life total is going to keep you alive.
This doubles your mana, more or less.
Yes, it doubles your mana. Technically. I mean, it gives you more mana. You're not doubling your Soul Ring or your Thran Dynamos or your Worn Power Stones.
My Soul Ring taps for 3.
Yeah, exactly. It's only a 33% increase. Yes, this is a very good card. You really can't complain about Forsaken Monument. It's not the most expensive that it's ever been. This has come down in price a lot since it was released because of various reprints, but it's still good to have.
Yeah, no, this is, again, I feel like this is one of the cards that if I see it in my opening hand in 3 lands, I'm just like, well, I don't care what the other cards are.
Yeah, this is a very scary card.
And on the big hitters, the higher end cards that probably would have ended up expensive, they were already kind of expensive and probably just would have gone through the roof.
Is it an Eldrazi Titan?
No.
We don't have any Eldrazi Titans reprints.
There are no Eldrazi Titans in this deck. Hey,
okay.
That's more space for you to work with.
No, it is not.
So the first one is technically an Eldrazi Titan, kind of. It's Morophon.
Nah, that's cheating.
It's Changeling. It's the same thing.
I wasn't expecting to see Morophon in here.
Morophon makes your commander free, plus commander decks.
Yeah, he does make your commander free. And he's a lord for Eldrazi.
And was like $12, $13.
Yeah. Is this a good reprint? Sure.
Yes.
Is this a good card in this deck?
It's not. There are worse cards that you could put in this deck.
Sure.
I feel like the big thing that Morophon does in this deck is fix your mana.
Yeah. I mean, it makes it so that you can just pay colorless.
Yeah, all of your Eldrazi I don't believe there are any double-pipped Eldrazi in this deck. Yeah, there are. Looking at the list, there are no double-pipped Eldrazi. This means everything in your deck that is a creature only costs colorless. The majority of your other spells also only cost colorless. This really gets you down.
Morophon is a needed reprint to bring that price down. He's always been expensive, so being able to build around him as a commander now is going to be more accessible. I'm not 100% sold on him being in this deck, because we could easily have just replaced him with some other Eldrazi, like an actual proper Eldrazi. But yeah, fine. We'll keep him probably, just because he's expensive and he makes our commander free and he's a lord for our tribe, so honestly can't complain about that.
Mm-hmm. Our next big hitter, again, well, it's a card that says Eldrazi in the name. That's expensive. It should be here. It's Eldrazi Monument.
Eldrazi Monument is very good in go wide decks.
It's very good in decks.
This is a good way to keep our Eldrazi alive against board wipes, because once we've committed to the board, we don't want our deck to be blown out, especially when we've committed huge amounts of mana or have used temporary ramp like Scions and Spawn to get our Eldrazi, and if they go away, we're not going to be able to reuse it. Making them evasive, it allows them to get in reliably for damage because of their aforementioned lack of built-in evasion or trample, and because we've seen that we have a decent amount of Spawn and Scion production in this deck, shouldn't be too hard to keep us around.
It's a nice little capstone, even though it's only 5 mana.
You have 2 or 3 big Eldrazi in play. You cast this if you have maybe a couple of spare Scions around, and then go nuts.
And our last super relevant reprint of this set. It's expensive. It's colorless. It says Eldrazi in the name.
Is it Eldrazi Conscription?
Funnily enough, it's also an Eldrazi spell, so I believe you can copy it with your commander. It is Eldrazi Conscription.
When's the last time we saw this reprinted?
Quick research. It's been on the list before, but the real reprint is Ultimate Masters.
So it's been a while. Yeah. For 8 mana, we're getting a pumping a creature into a +10/+10 trample annihilator 2.
Yep.
You know, this grants trample. Eldrazi don't have trample. That's a flavor loss there. Yeah, this is a good card. It's a good reprint. This thing's price has been through the roof. Does it belong in this deck?
You can copy this with your commander.
You can, and that makes it ridiculous, because this on its own takes our face commander into commander damage one-shotting range, because that's +20/+20 worth of stats, bringing its power up to 22 and trample and annihilator 4.
Hey, technically, that's 2 Annihilator 2 triggers. No, just to be clear, the reason I point out that it is 2 Annihilator 2 triggers, on the off chance you do have an instant speed Eldrazi spell to cast with your Annihilator triggers on the stack,
You get to copy them both.
you can copy them with your commander.
I mean, functionally, it's the same. If this were Annihilator 4, you'd still copy that trigger.
Well, you can also point them at different people, because your Eldrazi Conscription that's copied can go to different targets.
Well, it's a defending player.
Well, yeah, but my point is you can put them on different creatures.
That's true. Let's assume you're not taking this into my commander is now a one-shotting machine, and you're just turning a generically big Eldrazi into an even bigger generically big Eldrazi. Yeah, fine, sure. Can't really complain about this card being reprinted. Bring that price down, make this more accessible.
It's an expensive card that shouldn't be as expensive as it is, given how narrow it is.
Yeah. This stays in the deck because our commander can copy it. Otherwise, I would argue the fact that this probably doesn't belong in here, because generally this is a Voltron piece.
Generally, it's the kind of thing you cheat out with something that lets you cheat out Nora to hit with somebody on turn 2 and just functionally win.
Yeah, but it's fine here.
That's all the real reprints of consequence outside the Landbase. So, it's not bad overall. What you think?
Yeah, I can't really complain about the reprint quality.
There's less big hits than the last deck, but there's still enough good ones where you feel comfortable. Okay, so up next, we've got the mana base for this deck,
which you've been real ominous about. So let's see what we're looking at.
It's 38 lands, none of which are duplicates.
Except for the basics.
No, this deck has a single island, a single plains, a single forest, a single mountain, a single swamp, and a single waste.
Okay.
Everything else are unique non-basic lands, the majority of which produce colorless mana, including literally all 10 Pain lands.
Okay. Well, the Pain lands are expected.
Yeah, and some of these Pain lands were expensive. A Dark Hour Waste was expensive. Rushland was over $2. Carplusion Forest was like $3. It's actually a lot of money in the mana base here.
And it's, to be fair, if they weren't in here, they'd be added, because they
Yes.
are perfect for the deck. They tap for colorless, and then we can tap them for the colored mana if and when we need to, which it shouldn't be too often in this deck. So yeah, you really can't complain about that. How many of the tapped tri-lands are we seeing in this deck, if any?
So just running it down. A couple other things. Bonder's Enclave keeps getting reprinted. Nice.
Yeah, it's a way for us to take advantage of our big creatures to draw cards, so that's always going to be appreciated.
Cascading Cataracts keeps getting reprinted here. A couple bucks.
Yeah, fair. That's a way to get Wooburg.
Corrupted Crossroads, again, it's just a pain land for Devoid. It makes sense. Eldrazi Temple was like a $10 card. It's here.
Makes sense in the deck.
So far, our tap lands so far are Path of Ancestry,
Which we're a tribal deck, that makes sense to get the free scry.
Ruins of Oron Reef.
We're colorless again, so make our Eldrazi bigger with +1/+1 counters. You're not going to complain about that.
Yeah. 2 temples.
More fixing, I guess.
Just 2 temples. It's the strangest inclusion here. That's it. There's 4 tap lands in this deck.
Which, yeah, that makes this mana base pretty fast, especially when comparing it to other mana bases from other precons.
The fact that all 10 pain lands made it into this deck is just staggering. They are perfect. Well, they're perfect. That's why I didn't expect them.
Oh no, I'm not surprised, because Wizards, for lack of a better analogy here, has been getting their shit together since they last made a 5-color deck. The Sliver Swarm Precon, they got a lot of flack.
Yes, and that's why Eldrazi Temple is here, so we didn't get another Sliver Hive situation.
The fact is that they realized, yes, just sticking all the tapped tri-lands into the deck isn't going to fix the problem here. We live in a world where we have a lot of options, a lot of good lands, and then we can build a decent mana base and not break the bank here, because the pain lands are the cheapest they have ever been.
Wizards, don't listen to him. Put more tapped tri-lands in 5-color decks.
No, do not do
please.
that. Do not do that.
Come on. I need all 10 tapped triomes in the decks.
Well, yeah, I will.
Those are tri-lands that come into play tapped. Please give me all 10 of them in one deck.
Yeah, okay, sure. I will. You know what? I will back that. That I will back. They're fetchable, and we can cycle them. Yes, yes, do that. Give me the glacial mana base, baby. Give me the $200 glacial mana base.
Yeah, there we go.
But yeah, in this case, this is doable. That is weird. The fact that we've only got one of each basic and a waste.
I like it. I like it that it is a true singleton deck.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for memes, honestly.
This mana base is why you're not running sorcery-based ramp, though.
Yeah, it doesn't make any. Yeah, we
you
don't
have nothing to fetch.
We have 1 forest to fetch with our 3 visits with our Nature's Lore. We have 6 targets to hit off of Rampant Growth, Cultivate, Kodama's Reach. Yeah, most of our ramp is going to need to come from rocks.
This is fundamentally a colorless deck that has a lot of colored pips.
Yeah.
So the more important thing is getting the colorless pips. Are you going to keep Ash Barrens?
No. I don't like Ash Barrens.
I understand. A lot of people love it. It's come up a lot recently in people's opinions. It's just, it works perfectly as a land here and occasionally can fix you for whichever color you need.
Yeah, but, I mean, why not run War Room?
Well, no, War Room's bad in this deck, right? It's a 5-color deck.
He's devoid, though. He has no color. Is it free? How does War Room work with devoid commanders?
How does War Room interact with devoid? That's a very good question. I genuinely don't know. That's a, for now, question for the comments, I guess.
Yes. If anybody can tell us in the comments how Devoid interacts with War Room, go ahead and engage us down there, call of action, etc. Yeah, this is very good. This is very good. I can't really complain too much.
This deck is decidedly 5 colors. Speaking of that, take a look at the deck and see how decidedly 5 colors it is.
Let's see what we're looking at here.
Yeah, you just thumb through it. You don't have to give a commentary on everything. There's a processor in here, which I enjoy, because they're acknowledging that Eldrazi processors existed. It's also one of the ones with Flash.
Artisan of Kozilek is in here. Sure, that makes sense. Sifter of Skulls is another way for us to create Scions, so that's more ramp. Oblivion Sower. I'm not sure how I feel about this one. I've not been a big fan of this one. Generally, the ramp it gives you isn't worth it.
There's some fun cards in here, like Drowner of Hope, Deep Fathom Skulker, with some consistent card draw, and make sure your stuff can't be blocked.
Yeah, but why do we have Elder Deep Fiend in here?
Elder Deep Fiend is fun.
No, it isn't. You're gonna sacrifice. You're gonna pay 2 pips for sacrificing Eldrazi to get a 6/5 that taps down 4 things. That's not great.
It's got Flash,
which is relevant here because of the aforementioned casting Eldrazi at flash speed. So yeah, maybe that's the saving grace.
And because you can emerge it off of some of the other stuff. Like, again, token copies have mana costs. If memory serves me correct, a token copy of a creature has a mana cost.
Yes, if you're copying a
Sacrifice
creature with a mana cost, then the token copy has a mana cost as well.
So now you can sacrifice your token copy of something smaller to flash in your Elder Deep Fiend with Emerge to spend a surprisingly low amount of mana to tap down 8 things.
I mean, you're reaching here, my friend.
And then on top of that, because you can do this at flash speed, if you throw away something big enough, you can actually do this with something else on the stack to get even more copies. You get real freaky with it.
Maybe.
There's not a lot of flash speed Eldrazi.
No, I'm honestly surprised that there isn't a Vadalkan Ori in here, because I figure that the colorless deck would be able to use it, considering how good actually giving things flash is in this deck.
Well, it's in your budget nowadays, so do what you must.
We have Crib Swap in here, as you mentioned earlier. I'm not sure how I feel about this. It's here for the triggering of our commander, generally. So I suppose it stays in just for the purposes of that. Return of the Wild Speaker arguably is better than Rishkar's Expertise.
Yeah, they kept putting cards in here that I'm like, oh, this is just one of his pet cards, huh?
Yeah, Return of the Wild Speaker is a good
this is just
card.
one of his pet cards, huh?
They've been listening to me. Overflowing Chalice, I'm not sure how I feel about this one in here. This is, I mean, we're going to have a lot of mana and being able to turn all that mana into more mana by pumping it into the Chalice.
Sometimes you just sacrifice 2 Scions to up your Overflowing Chalice by 1.
Idol of Oblivion. Should it be in here? How many tokens do we create?
There's a fair amount of token creation.
We have a lot of talismans in here.
The 4 talismans is a fair amount.
Yeah, which is good to keep. Again, we're going to have to get most of our ramp from our rocks or our creatures at this point, so I'm assuming that we're going to get most of that from Scion Creation or rocks.
Or Hedron Archive, Mystic Forge, Dreamstone Hedron.
No, Thran Dynamo, the cowards.
Again, here are your 3 non-colorless permanents in the entire deck.
The enchantments, Awakened Zone, Garruk's Uprising. Yeah, we're playing huge creatures, so yeah, that makes sense. Prison on the Moon, which we went over with, and Eldrazi Conscription is colorless, so it's 3.
Yeah, I say 4, I meant 3.
But yeah, overall, the deck looks good. Can't really complain about it too much. I think we can get rid of some of these lower cost, maybe situational Eldrazi for bigger beat sticks. More traditional Eldrazi with big Annihilator.
This deck definitely does feel more like a mid-rangey Eldrazi deck because, you know, instead of paying just giant Eldrazi, you just pay a 2 extra on your mid-range one for 2 of them.
Or you pay 2 extra on your top-end ones to get 2 gigantic ones.
Fair. It's definitely more of a deck dedicated to the Battle for Zendikar era of Eldrazi and the Shadows over Innistrad era of Eldrazi, where things were Eldrazi, but not necessarily the old OG Zendikar giant world-crushing monsters. There's only so much you can do with that kind of space, you know. You had to get weird with it.
Well, yeah, but that's the Eldrazi space. That's their entire thing.
And getting weird with stuff, literally.
But I don't think this deck's too much of a disappointment. I am kind of disappointed with the new cards, but the rest of the deck kind of sort of makes up for it. That's an impressive mana base, decent amount of good reprints.
I feel like you're underrating more than a few of those cheaper cards, too.
I mean, if I'm proven wrong, I'll take my lumps. But in this case, I think that some of these lower cost ones are just not that impressive. But again, that's just me. All right, so you got anything else for me?
Nope, that's the whole deck. You've seen it all.
All right, fair enough. So that is another one in the books that we've gone over Eldrazi Incursion. Again, thank you all for joining us here. Any feedback is appreciated on this new video format because, again, we want to bring you more content, and being able to do this in the long term is the idea. But again, we want to hear back from you if you enjoy this, if you enjoy the banter, if there's anything you'd improve, anything you don't want to hear, and we'll take all that under advisement. And again, Kaprak, thank you for joining me today and for compiling all this again as you did previously.
No worries. Glad to help.
And otherwise, for everyone else, again, if you'd like to go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe, that helps out the channel a lot and helps the almighty algorithm promote this to more people. Also, something I forgot to mention in the previous one, our 20K subscriber giveaway is still going on, so I'll include a link to that in the description of this video, so you can go ahead and enter for a chance to win a deck featuring the Gitrog Ravenous Ride and a bunch of upgrades and accessories for it, depending on how far along we get for the stretch goals before the drawing on June 8th. So be sure to check that out if you haven't already. Otherwise, this was Grazzet.
And I'm Kaprak.
And have a good one, folks, and stay safe.